The White House, that has housed 46 presidents for over 200 years, just issued a statement that shattered constitutional precedent. Not because of political disagreement, not because of legal technicalities. White House Chief of Staff Sarah Matthews told reporters this morning, "The president does not recognize the constitutional authority of this Congress to remove him from office. Let that sink in. I'm Barbara Green, and this is independent investigative journalism. Before we go any further, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, leave a comment below telling me whether you think constitutional rules should apply equally to everyone. Share this video with everyone you know. This is the only official channel, and what I'm about to show you is happening in real time across Washington, and it's spreading to every federal agency in America. What I'm about to walk you through tonight is not abstract constitutional theory. This is a crisis unfolding in front of us, where written rules mean nothing when someone with institutional power decides they don't apply to him. We are watching the Constitution itself being stress-tested in ways the founders never imagined. Here's the core argument tonight in plain language. When Congress votes to remove a president and that president simply says no, every other institution in America has to choose which authority to follow. This isn't about politics. It's about whether written rules matter when someone with power decides they're optional. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through the specific events that led to this constitutional standoff, the institutional responses happening right now, and who's going to pay the price when our entire system of checks and balances collapses in real time. Because this story isn't theoretical, it's happening. Federal workers across the country are receiving contradictory orders from their own government. Military commanders are watching their chain of command fracture. International allies are questioning whether America still has a functioning democracy. And every single institution that keeps this country running is being forced to choose sides in a constitutional crisis that has no legal precedent. Think about that. The Constitution that has guided this country for 247 years just became a suggestion. The impeachment process that the founders created as the ultimate check on presidential power just got ignored. The separation of powers that prevents any one person from becoming above the law just got shredded by a White House statement. And it gets worse, because when one institution decides constitutional rules are optional, every other institution has to decide whether they're going to enforce those rules or follow suit. The Pentagon, the Justice Department, the Secret Service, federal courts, every government contractor, every federal employee, each one of them is making that choice right now. This is not a drill. This is not political theatre. This is the moment when America finds out whether its democratic institutions are strong enough to survive someone who refuses to leave when constitutionally removed from office. To understand how we got to this constitutional breaking point, let me walk you through the domino chain that led us here. Because this didn't happen overnight. This was a sequence of escalating violations that built momentum until the entire system snapped. First domino, June 21st, 2025. President Trump ordered a preemptive military strike on Iranian nuclear facilities without congressional authorization. No imminent threat. No emergency briefing to Congress. But here's the kicker. Foreign leaders in Germany, France, and the UK received advance notice. Congress found out when CNN reported explosions in Tehran. Representative Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, told reporters that evening, "We learned about American military action against a sovereign nation from international news reports, while our supposed allies were briefed in advance." Translation: Congress was deliberately cut out of constitutionally required war authorization. Second domino. January 3rd, 2026. Trump authorized bombing campaigns in Venezuela and the kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro without any declaration of war. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin later testified that he received direct orders to execute the operation with no legal review and no congressional notification. Austin said under oath, "I was told this fell under existing executive authorities. When I asked for the legal justification in writing, I was told that was classified above my clearance level." Think about that. The Secretary of Defense was told a military operation was too classified for him to see the legal justification. Third domino. The social media posts that crossed the line from political rhetoric into direct threats. On December 15, 2025, Trump posted on Truth Social, "Each one of these traitors to our country should be arrested and put on trial." He was referring to members of Congress who had questioned the Venezuela operation. 3 days later, seditious behavior, punishable by death. Let me introduce you to Sarah Chen, a 15-year Pentagon analyst who has been watching this chain of events unfold from inside the building. Sarah told me, "I've been analyzing threat assessments for 3 presidential administrations. I've never seen anything like this. We have active military commanders asking legal counsel whether they're required to follow orders that contradict their oath to defend the Constitution. That's not a hypothetical question anymore. That's Tuesday morning staff meetings." And Sarah is not alone. Across the Pentagon, career officers are facing an impossible choice between following direct orders from the Commander-in-Chief and upholding their sworn oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Fourth domino, the impeachment filings that became inevitable. House Resolution 353 charged Trump with 7 articles of impeachment, including obstruction of justice, usurpation of Congress's appropriations power, abuse of trade powers, violation of First Amendment rights, creation of unlawful offices, bribery and corruption, and tyranny. That's not political hyperbole. Those are the actual legal charges filed by Congress. House Resolution 537 focused specifically on the Iran strike, stating, "The president's preemptive attack on Iranian nuclear sites in June 2025, without congressional authorization, constituted an act of war against a sovereign nation without imminent threat to American interests." House Resolution 939 addressed the social media threats, charging that Trump's calls for the execution of members of Congress constituted high crimes and misdemeanors. But here's what nobody is saying out loud. These weren't symbolic gestures. These were desperate attempts by a co-equal branch of government to reassert constitutional authority that had been systematically eroded over 18 months. Fifth domino, the votes that changed everything. The House passed impeachment 218 to 213. Every Democrat voted yes. 5 Republicans broke ranks, including Representative Liz Cheney, who said on the House floor, "I took an oath to defend the Constitution, not to defend any individual who violates it." The Senate vote was even more dramatic. 67 senators voted to convict and remove. That included 17 Republicans who said they could not ignore the evidence of unconstitutional military action and direct threats against Congress itself. Senator Mitch McConnell, in his final speech before the vote, said something that still gives me chills. "The Senate must choose today between our oath to the Constitution and our loyalty to any individual. I choose the Constitution." Translation, even Trump's most reliable allies recognized this had gone beyond normal political boundaries into constitutional crisis territory. And that brings us to the 6th and final domino, the refusal. Because constitutional processes only work if the person being held accountable accepts constitutional authority. On January 20th, 2026, at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time, the White House issued the statement that shattered 247 years of constitutional precedent. Now watch what happens next, because when constitutional authority gets ignored, every other institution has to choose sides. Here's what happened in the 72 hours after Congress voted to remove Donald Trump from office. Because when constitutional authority collides with institutional defiance, every other pillar of American democracy gets forced to choose sides. January 20th, 2026, 11:23 a.m. The Senate vote concludes. 67 senators vote to convict and remove. The Constitution is clear. Trump is no longer president. The oath of office transfers to Vice President Vance under the 25th Amendment. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announces, "Donald Trump has been constitutionally removed from the office of President of the United States, effective immediately." January 20th, 2026, 3:47 p.m. The White House response shatters 247 years of constitutional precedent. Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany reads the statement that changed everything. These proceedings are illegitimate and will not be recognized by this administration. The President continues to hold the full constitutional authority of the presidency. Any attempt to enforce these unconstitutional actions will be treated as sedition against the United States government. Let that sink in. Translation: We're not leaving, and anyone who tries to make us leave is a traitor. January 21st, 2026, 6 a.m. Emergency meeting at the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin calls together the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The question on the table: does the military follow the constitutional process or the person currently occupying the White House? General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, later testified about that meeting. We spent 4 hours discussing whether our oath to defend the Constitution meant defending it from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Every person in that room understood the implications of that word. Domestic. Think about that. America's top military commanders were debating whether the sitting president qualified as a domestic enemy of the Constitution. The Joint Chiefs issued their own statement at 2:15 p.m. The United States military swears an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, not any individual. We are reviewing all lawful orders through constitutional frameworks. Translation: We're not automatically following Trump's orders anymore. But wait, there's something they're not telling you. The Secret Service found itself in an impossible position. Their job is to protect the president. But who is the president when Congress has constitutionally removed one person and that person refuses to leave? Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle held an emergency briefing with senior agents. We protect the office of the presidency as defined by constitutional succession. If the Constitution says Vance is president, we protect Vance. If constitutional processes have been followed, we follow the Constitution. But here's where it gets complicated. Half the Secret Service detail assigned to Trump received orders to maintain protection. The other half received orders to transition to Vice President Vance. Agents were getting contradictory orders from their own chain of command. Special Agent Maria Santos, a dossier Secret Service veteran, described the chaos. I had supervisors telling me to prepare for transition to President Vance, while other supervisors told me to maintain current protection protocols for President Trump. When I asked which orders to follow, I was told that was above my clearance level. January 22nd, 2026, 9 a.m. Attorney General Merrick Garland faces the question that no Attorney General has ever faced. Do you enforce a constitutional removal against someone who refuses to acknowledge it? Garland's statement was carefully worded but unmistakable. The Department of Justice recognizes constitutional processes and the rule of law. When Congress follows constitutional procedures for removal, those procedures have force of law. We will enforce constitutional outcomes through appropriate legal mechanisms. Translation: We're going to try to force him out through the courts. But here's what nobody anticipated. Federal judges started receiving conflicting briefs. Trump's legal team filed emergency motions claiming the impeachment was unconstitutional. Vance's legal team filed motions asserting constitutional succession. The Supreme Court faced a question they never thought they'd have to answer. What happens when someone constitutionally removed from office refuses to leave? Chief Justice John Roberts made an unprecedented statement. The Supreme Court will hear emergency arguments on constitutional succession and the enforcement of impeachment procedures. This case presents questions of constitutional law that require immediate resolution, and then the international response hit like a shockwave. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg issued a statement that sent chills through the State Department. NATO requires clarity on legitimate government authority for all security cooperation and intelligence sharing until constitutional processes are resolved. NATO will suspend routine cooperation with US authorities pending clarification of legitimate command structure. Think about that. Our closest allies just said they don't know who's running America. French President Emmanuel Macron was even more direct. We cannot engage in diplomatic relations with a government that does not recognise its own constitutional processes. The European Union will suspend formal diplomatic engagement until constitutional authority is clarified. But here's where the domino effect becomes undeniable. Federal agencies started receiving contradictory orders. The FBI was told by Acting Attorney General Garland to prepare enforcement actions for constitutional succession. The FBI was simultaneously told by White House Chief of Staff Matthews to investigate congressional leadership for sedition. FBI Director Christopher Wray issued the most stunning statement in Bureau history. The FBI follows constitutional authority and court orders. We do not investigate constitutionally authorized congressional actions. We do not participate in political disputes about election outcomes. We enforce federal law as defined by constitutional processes. Translation: we're not Trump's personal police force. The Federal Reserve faced its own crisis. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell received a call from the White House demanding he refuse cooperation with any Vance transition team. Powell's response became legendary. The Federal Reserve operates under congressional charter and constitutional authority. We recognize legitimate government as defined by constitutional processes, not political declarations. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. Military commanders at bases across the country started reporting conflicting orders. General Sarah Wilson, commanding officer at Fort Bragg, described receiving simultaneous orders from the Pentagon and from White House liaisons. She told investigators, "I received orders from the Secretary of Defense to prepare for constitutional transition procedures. I received orders from White House personnel to maintain current command structure and ignore congressional actions. I chose to follow the Constitution. But not every commander made that choice." General Michael Torres at Ramstein Air Base in Germany issued a statement supporting continued Trump authority. Congressional actions appear politically motivated and do not represent legitimate constitutional processes. This command continues to recognize executive authority as currently constituted. Let that sink in. American military commanders were choosing sides based on their personal interpretation of constitutional authority. This next part is going to blow your mind. By January 23, 2026, federal employees across the country were receiving paychecks from two different sources. The Treasury Department, following Vance transition orders, issued federal payroll. The Office of Management and Budget, following White House orders, issued competing payroll. Federal workers were getting paid twice, while being told to ignore half their supervisors. And it gets worse. Because when you have two people claiming to be president and institutional loyalty splits down the middle, every other country has to decide which America they're going to deal with. China announced they would continue diplomatic relations with the Trump administration. Russia announced recognition of continuing Trump authority. Mexico and Canada announced they would wait for constitutional clarity before engaging with either claimant. America just became two different countries in the eyes of the world. Constitutional crises sound abstract until they land on your kitchen table. Let me show you what happens when America's government tears itself apart by introducing you to 5 Americans whose lives got shattered when their own government couldn't decide who was in charge. Meet James Thompson, a 20-year veteran of the Internal Revenue Service working out of the Cincinnati Processing Center. James has processed tax returns through 4 presidential administrations. He thought he understood how government worked. On January 23, 2026, James received 2 different sets of instructions for processing federal tax refunds. One set came from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's office, following standard procedures under what they called the Vance administration. The other set came from White House Budget Director Russell Vought, ordering him to freeze all refund processing until constitutional authority was clarified. James told me, "I've been doing this job for 2 decades. I process 200 tax returns a day. I help families get their refunds so they can pay bills and feed their kids. Now I have 2 different bosses telling me to do opposite things. If I follow Treasury, the White House says I'm insubordinate. If I follow the White House, Treasury says I'm violating federal law. I'm just trying to do my job. And James is not alone. Across the IRS, 75,000 federal employees were receiving contradictory orders about basic government functions. Think about that. The agency that keeps America's financial system running couldn't figure out who was giving legitimate orders. Let me tell you about Captain Jennifer Walsh, stationed at Naval Station Norfolk. Jennifer is a 15-year Navy veteran with 2 deployments to Afghanistan and a spotless service record. On January 24, 2026, Jennifer's unit received simultaneous orders from 2 different command structures. Her direct superior, following Pentagon directives, ordered preparations for constitutional transition protocols. But base commanders, citing White House authority, ordered the unit to disregard Pentagon directives and maintain current operational status. Jennifer described the moment her unit started fracturing. Half my sailors were following Pentagon orders. Half were following base command. We had shipmates who wouldn't speak to each other because they thought the other half were either traitors to the Constitution or traitors to the President. I watched 20 years of military discipline collapse in 48 hours. These are people who trusted each other with their lives. Now they couldn't agree on who they were supposed to be taking orders from. The human cost doesn't stop at government employees. Linda Martinez runs a defense contracting firm in Colorado Springs that employs 150 people building components for military drones. On January 25, 2026, Linda received a call from Pentagon Procurement telling her to halt all deliveries pending constitutional clarity. 2 hours later, she received a call from White House liaisons ordering her to continue deliveries and ignore Pentagon directives. Linda faced an impossible choice: follow orders that might be legitimate, or risk her entire business by backing the wrong authority. Linda told me, "I have 150 families depending on paychecks from my company. I have contracts worth $12 million that suddenly nobody knows if they're valid. The Pentagon says one thing, the White House says another. I'm supposed to guess which one is the real government. I started this business to serve my country. Now I don't know which country I'm serving." But the chaos spread far beyond Washington. David Kim has been mayor of Portland, Oregon for 6 years. Portland depends on federal grants for transportation, housing, and public safety. On January 26, 2026, David received conflicting instructions about federal funding. The Department of Transportation, following what they called Vance administration directives, approved Portland's $40 million infrastructure grant. The Office of Management and Budget, following White House directives, froze the same grant pending constitutional resolution. David described trying to run a city with 2 different federal governments. "I have road projects that were supposed to start next month. I have 200 city workers whose jobs depend on federal grants. I have contracts signed with the federal government that suddenly might not be valid. I'm supposed to tell taxpayers that we don't know if we're getting federal money because Washington can't figure out who's president. People expect their mayor to have answers. I don't even know which phone number to call. And here's the story that should make everyone angry. Maria Gonzalez is a single mother working for Immigration and Customs Enforcement in El Paso, Texas. Maria processes asylum applications for families fleeing violence in Central America. On January 27, 2026, Maria received orders from Homeland Security to continue processing applications under standard procedures. She simultaneously received orders from White House immigration officials to halt all asylum processing and prepare for enhanced deportation operations. Maria faces families every day whose lives depend on her decisions. She told me, "I have a family from Honduras whose 8-year-old daughter was threatened by gangs. I have their asylum application ready for approval. One boss tells me to approve it. Another boss tells me to deny it and prepare deportation papers. That little girl's safety depends on which orders I follow. I became a federal employee to help people escape violence. Now I'm trapped between 2 governments that can't agree on basic humanity." These 5 stories represent millions of Americans watching their government tear itself apart in real time. Federal workers, military families, government contractors, local officials, immigration officers, every level of American society is being forced to choose sides in a constitutional crisis that nobody was prepared for. And here's the irony. The Constitution was designed to prevent exactly this scenario. Separation of powers, checks and balances, clear lines of succession, all of it was supposed to ensure that government authority was never in question. Instead, those same constitutional provisions are being used to justify ignoring constitutional authority. The founders created a system where constitutional processes would be respected by everyone, including the people being held accountable by those processes. They never imagined someone would simply say no to constitutional removal and force every institution to choose between written rules and personal loyalty. That is not abstract political theory. That is 150 million Americans waking up every morning not knowing which government they live under. Now, let me show you exactly how America's constitutional safeguards failed so catastrophically that we ended up with two people claiming to be president. Because this wasn't random chaos. This was a predictable system failure that experts saw coming years ago. The math argument. This isn't about politics. It's about institutional incentives and power structures that made constitutional defiance not just possible, but almost inevitable. First, the precedent breakdown. For decades, Congress systematically ceded war powers to the executive branch. The 2001 authorization for use of military force got stretched from targeting al-Qaeda to justifying military action in 37 different countries. Congress stopped declaring wars and started authorizing force. Translation: presidents learned that constitutional war powers were suggestions, not requirements. Dr. Michael Harrison, constitutional scholar at Georgetown University, warned about this in 2023. We've created a system where executive power expands during every crisis and never contracts when the crisis ends.